Good evening, campers. Anthony Dank Tano here. YouTube's busiest literary nerd. God darn it. I don't have a pug and my teeth are functionally adequate. And today we are going to review The Wheel of Time, the first book based off the Amazon Prime series. My original plan was to read this before the TV series came out, but there was a little bit of a hiccup. Jordan's book is disastrously slow, therefore it took me way longer than it needed to. Oh, as start as you mean to go on. I came across this book when I was in university, and I mean this book because I didn't know it was a 12-book series of what I'm not going to continue with. Give up all dreams of that. I used to share digs with a guy who was massively into fantasy, and in the living room one day we did similar courses. We both did English literature, but we both did different offshoots. He had this old 90s copy, just battered, like the thing was pretty much falling apart. I'd never seen it before, and I just questioned him, and he said it was his third time reading through the series. As someone who doesn't read fantasy, seeing 12 books on a bookshelf that's all one series was a little bit baffling, a little bit off-putting to like, wow, okay. Skip possibly 6 years later, I worked with a very lovely lady called Runa. And Runa doesn't read at all, and we would talk about the books I was currently reading. She always said, oh, I want to read more. I asked her, I was like, I'll read a book of whatever you want. Like, what's your favourite book? Because you must have read something. And she went, oh, there's this book called The Wheel of Time. Upon unveiling that, I wished Runa a very happy, long life and walked away. And then we had a pandemic, so I literally haven't seen her. Haven't seen her in 2 years. I hope she's doing well. Maybe once all of this is over, we return to normality and none of us die due to this new variant that's going on. I can look Runa in the eyes and say, I finally did it. And I regret it. What is The Wheel of Time about? Well, we start off in one of Jordan's infamous prologues, where a man who is the dragon slaughters his family, trying to fend off the Dark One, and in the process breaking the world apart. The Wheel of Time itself is where the present becomes the past becomes legend, the legend becomes myth, and within each new era, things regurgitate again. History repeats itself to the layman. The Dark One, almost a middle-class ice queen from Narnia, being ever present. Lewis, therein Kingslayer, the old dragon, the one who broke the world, passes on. And we have now the chance for a new dragon, a new journey, a new adventure. But every couple of years or so on, someone will claim to be a dragon. Someone will give a false prophecy, and the person who we think that they are ends up causing havoc, starting wars and battles along the way. What we're trying to figure out is, who is the next dragon? The legitimate, the real. From the prologue, we are going to scoot along in time and meet 3 people who we're going to know fairly well. We'll get on to that. Rand, Matt, and Perrin, who live in a very small community. Think quaint, idyllic, serene, cottagecore, but mostly pastoral. That is until there's an attack by Trollocs, led by the undead Mithril. Rand, Matt, and Perrin flee, but ultimately they learn to understand that the attack wasn't on the village, it was for them directly. And how are they going to deduce this? Well, they're going to meet people who just happened to be there. They just happened to be there. For the reader, Jordan's making us question, well, is this part of a prophecy? Is this all part of a bigger picture? Is that why the Trollocs and the Ring Wraiths, I mean the Fade, Now let's actually talk about this. Most criticisms when it comes to the Eye of the World is that this is just a Lord of the Rings knockoff, that everything that Tolkien has done within a franchise that most of us have read, we've watched the movies, or have at least some base knowledge of what The Lord of the Rings is about, has been hammered into this book. And we can look at the Fade, we can look at the Shire-esque village that ran Matt and Perrin. We could even think about Perrin and Peregrine and how Rand and Matt have a almost Frodo and Samwise relationship. Criticism like that does feel a little bit redundant, because otherwise aren't most fantasy writers reimagining, remediating and reinvigorating Tolkien's story and Tolkien's ideas, and are all drawing from pretty much the same thing? When it comes to fantasy, The Hobbit was released in 1937. It hasn't even reached its centenary yet. Fantasy as we know it is quite new as a genre. Tolkien's ultimately going to be copied. But equally, I would like to rebut against those people saying, well, there's also enough within the Wheel of Time that lends from Arthurian legend. Remember the worst Green Man Festival right at the end? It's clearly taken from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The person who sits on the throne is Camlin, which is a reference to Camelot. We have Tom Merlin, who's like Merlin, and one of the towns is even called Tarvalon. Avalon. Referencing different work isn't a criticism. He is building upon this. And if we talk about, wait, I'm going to say it, because I'm a fantasy reviewer now. The world building, you're welcome everyone, in this is clear. Though I'm going to say this, I don't really understand good world building, because surely with most books, you know what it looks like. You'll know the people. Unless I've really not read a book with bad world building, I understood the places that they were at. I don't particularly understand the rating of world building. Does it just mean that you need a map? Because we have those in real life, they're called OS maps, and they're really dry and boring, like this book. My criticism here is that I don't feel as though the Wheel of Time, and yes, this is a 12th of the entire series, at me, I don't care, is that there is no real arc. We just encounter people, something happens, we'll encounter someone else, something happens, we'll encounter someone else, and then something else happens in a very similar Tolkien-esque way. And it's a reason why I don't particularly enjoy the Lord of the Rings series. On top of that, the main protagonist, who I would say is Rand, is limp-fisted. You have Matt, who is hard-fisted. His entire role is to just mess things up for people and get in the way. We have Perrin, who is magic-fisted, and really everything feels ham-fisted. There were moments within this novel where I thought, if I just sit down quietly enough and thought really hard, a wolf would come through and just take out my jugular. Just absolutely get right in there and end it. That's called a hyperbole, but the pacing of this is off, and a lot of the encounters seem a bit senseless, and that the characters are bowing to the plot. Where everything really becomes a cohesive whole is the battle in the end, where you do feel in the middle of the carnage, the light, and the screaming. Apart from that, this is almost akin to watching people on CCTV, watching a walk. Sometimes they trek. Sometimes they'll canter. Mostly they'll saunt a little bit. Then they sit down for a few pages. And they'll stand back up. And so we go a-roving. Do I think this is a great book? Not particularly. Are people only reading it now because of the Amazon TV show? Yeah. Is that a bad thing? No. Like, read more books. That's what we should be encouraging. But I don't think this is a book to put in someone's hand. I mean, 12 books is a commitment in and of itself. To round this off, I think the main question that I need to answer is, where do I think this story is going to go? Well, based on the Wheel of Time, if things are going to repeat themselves, I don't think we should be repeating mistakes. For me, this is a 2 out of 10. Unlike most people, I could just binge the Amazon shows, couldn't I? That'd save me way more time than it was reading this. I'll just do that, eh?